But everyone in the audience will be muted automatically, so you don't have to worry about showing up on YouTube unless you're speaking and in this nice little yellow box. Likewise, if you have questions at any point this evening for our authors, please type them in the chat. Rachel and I will save those up, and we'll ask them then at the Q&A at the end. And by the way, I'm here with my wonderful colleague Rachel from Northshire's Saratoga Springs location, and I'm Davith Wood from Northshire's Manchester, Vermont location. So without further ado, let me hand things over to Rachel, who will introduce our authors tonight.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for your continued support of independent bookselling. It is my great pleasure to get to welcome Martha Hall Kelly to Northshire Live this evening. She is the author of the runaway bestseller Lilac Girls and joined us last year in Saratoga in one of our very last events before the shutdown to celebrate her book Lost Roses. At that wonderful event, we got a tiny sneak preview of her next book, which sounded so far away at the time, Sunflower Sisters. And we're lucky to get to celebrate that new book with her here tonight. In a reunion of sorts, Martha will be interviewed by Kim van Alkemade, who also interviewed her here last year at that wonderful event. Kim is a great friend of the Northshire and the author of the staff favorites Orphan No. 8 and Bachelor Girl. Please join me in welcoming them both to Northshire Live.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's so fun to be here and back with Kim. I feel like that last event was so long ago, but maybe someday soon we'll all get out there again. And I feel like things are starting to open up, so it's exciting.
It's a lot to look forward to. Actually signing books for readers. That's something I really miss.
I know, me too. And just talking to everybody, and yeah, I didn't realize I would miss it so much, but it's like the #1 thing. I'm just itching to get out there. And I'm sure you feel the same way.
Yes, it'll be really nice to get out in the world again. But Martha, I wondered if you wanted to start with a very short reading or just kind of an overview of Sunflower Sisters and let us know sort of what it's about and how you came to write this book.
We don't have the video, do we, from Random House? By any chance?
Yes, I can absolutely show that video. I forgot that was a thing I was supposed to be doing, and I will get that all set up.
I forgot too, so that's
a moment.
But that might be a good thing to show because it really gives kind of a background, especially for people if they haven't read the other books. It helps kind of ground you.
I am almost there. I'm just finding it in my files.
I should probably.
One thing I'll say is you don't have, I mean, it's great if people read all 3 of your books, but I don't think they need to feel like they need to. I think each book absolutely stands on its own generation, even though they're connected through that family. And it had been a while since I read your first 2 books, and I just found that this Sunflower Sisters worked really wonderfully all on its own.
Oh, that's so good to hear. I know that they're kind of presenting it as a trilogy, but it really, you're right. I think you can just read them on their own. And some people are saying what order is best to read them in. And I don't know anybody that has read Sunflower Sisters first and then gone forward in time, but I bet that's a good way to do it. And also, I mean, there are a lot of people who have done it the other way. Yeah. So we know that works. But, you know, I sprinkled a lot of so-called Easter eggs into all the books. So it's kind of fun, I would think, to read from the Civil War forward, because then you see, like by the time you get to Lilac Girls, you know what the Woolsey silver is, for example, that Caroline uses. You know that these women in the past had used it. Certain pieces of furniture are in all 3 books. So you start feeling like this grounded sense of, you know, the family.
Yeah.
So maybe it would be good to start with Sunflower Sisters if you haven't read any of them.
I think I would suggest that if there's anyone
really
in the audience. Yeah, I read them backwards: Lilac Girls, Lost Roses, Sunflower Sisters. But I think it would be really really neat to move the other direction, Civil War, World War I, World War II, and to see this family of women evolve with the times.
Yeah, I think that's really true. That's a good point. And Caroline has such a strong sense of philanthropy, and you would kind of see where that came from. Yeah. Okay, Kim.
I have the video ready whenever you guys are ready.
Okay.
Awesome.
Okay, here it comes. Am I doing wrong? Can't see it.
Hey, Rachel, there's no sound on there. If you could
Thank you.
see if you could fix that.
Oh dear, I'm sorry about that. Let me try that again. Many apologies. I practiced this last week too. There we go. Okay.
Hi, everybody. Martha Hall Kelly here. Thank you so much for joining me to talk about my new novel, Sunflower Sisters. I'll miss going out on book tour this year, but at least I can still come to you from my home and connect with readers around the world. You may be familiar with my first two books about the Woolsey Faraday family, Lilac Girls and Lost Roses. I thought I'd share a bit about the research and historical inspiration behind those novels and how they paved the way for Sunflower Sisters. I first learned of a fascinating woman named Caroline Faraday in 1999 when I read an article in Victorian magazine about her famous gardens. The article showed photos of Caroline's home in Connecticut, now known as the Bellamy Faraday House, and photos of her renowned garden, filled with roses and lilacs. I love lilacs and really wanted to visit, but with 3 young children, I had little time to spare. But one Mother's Day, my husband Michael urged me to go, and I visited the estate, unaware that the trip would lead to my first novel. I was the only visitor on the tour of the lovely old home that spring day. During the tour, I came upon Caroline's desk, and a photograph of a group of young women caught my eye. The guide referred to them as the Rabbits and told me that Caroline took up the cause of these young Polish girls after they were experimented upon by the Nazis at Ravensbrück concentration camp. She brought them to America for rehabilitation, and once I heard their story, I was fascinated and set out to learn everything I could about them. My goal was to write a fictionalized account of actual events and to perhaps breathe new life into a story that seemed to me had fallen from public view. I started my research at the Bellamy Faraday House and then traveled to Paris, where I found another archive of Caroline's letters to immerse myself in. In Poland, I was lucky enough to interview a Ravensbrück survivor and took the train to Germany to see the concentration camp. That's a day I'll never forget. While writing and researching Lilac Girls, I came to love Caroline Faraday's mother, Eliza Woolsey Mitchell. The daughter of one of the famous Woolsey women of New York City, known for being staunch abolitionists and philanthropists, Eliza ended up devoting her time to the cause of white Russian emigres, former aristocrats in Russia who lost everything when the Bolsheviks seized power from the Tsar in 1918. When the emigres arrived in New York City, many of them destitute and traumatized, Eliza helped the women find work and a place to live. She even opened her own apartment and Southampton cottage to them. I began to embark on a new journey that inspired the story of Lost Roses. I created a wall with the other characters I wanted to add, Eliza's aristocratic Russian friend Sophia and a Russian peasant girl, Marinka. To bring the story alive for readers, I traveled to Russia and explored everything from the Tsar's palaces to rustic villages. I visited Long Island, New York, and peeked past the privacy hedges of Southampton's Gin Lane into the famous shingle-style cottages and estates. And in France, I discovered a lovely, little-known Russian part of Paris. But the place I drew the most inspiration from was again the Bellamy Faraday House. From the archives there, I used Eliza's and Caroline's letters and other personal writing to bring this story to light. This incredible family wouldn't let me go after 2 novels, so I traveled further back in time to the Civil War to tell the story of Caroline's great aunt and how she fought to be a nurse on the battlefields of the war for the North and to be part of the fight against slavery. That's how Sunflower Sisters was born. It's told from Georgiana Woolsey's point of view, and also from the points of view of 2 fictitious characters, Gemma, a young woman enslaved on a tobacco plantation, and Anne May, the mistress of that plantation. Many of the historical events in the book are drawn from the Woolsey family letters in the archives at Caroline's house. One letter, which described the sisters seeing a slave market in Charleston, a site that set them on their path to abolitionism, sent me to South Carolina to start my research journey to see the market they described, now a museum. Luckily, I lived in Atlanta at the time, near the Atlanta History Center, with an extensive collection of Civil War artifacts, where they shared their deep knowledge of everyday life during the war. I also visited former plantations, now museums, every chance I got, in the surrounding area. Since Sunflower Sisters is set in Maryland, a border state, Sauterley Plantation was especially inspiring, on the banks of the Patuxent River. A key part of Sunflower Sisters takes place in Gettysburg on the battlefield, so I spent a lot of time there, tracing the steps of the characters so I could write about the place as accurately as possible. My son, who I dedicated the book to, came with me on those trips and helped me document my research. Gettysburg is such an incredibly moving place, and it was helpful to visit the actual sites of scenes in the book. The field hospital where Georgie and her mother, Jane Eliza, actually nursed soldiers, Union and Confederate alike, to the train station where the wounded were sent off in cattle cars, to the hallowed ground where Gemma gets caught up in battle. Caroline Faraday was a staunch supporter of civil rights. I think she'd be happy to know that her abolitionist Woolsey ancestors' stories are being told. It's been bittersweet writing Sunflower Sisters, the last in a series of books about Caroline Faraday's incredible family. But whenever I miss these characters, I know where I can find them. In the pages of Lilac Girls, Lost Roses, and now Sunflower Sisters. And I hope you will too. Thanks, Rachel. That was great. Good job.
Good job.
Sorry about the technical glitch at the beginning.
No, it was perfect. Thank you.
I think after that great introduction, I might jump to a question that I was really curious about in your writing process, because for me as a reader, this book felt more confident in a way. And I felt, it seemed to me that as a writer, you were more confident and at ease, even though this book has very intricate plotting, a lot of interconnections. It's like there's something happening on every page. But I wondered, as a writer, how it was for you. I remember you kind of decided to become a fiction writer to tell the story of Lilac Girls. Now you are a writer. Was it different for you with this book, Sunflower Sisters?
Wow, that's such a great question. And only a writer, my fellow writer, could ask that question. Because don't you feel like you read books differently, knowing being a writer? Wow. It's funny, my agent, when she finished reading the manuscript of it, said, oh, it seems like this one was much easier for you to write. And that kind of lives well with your comment. And I said, no, not really. And here's why. But it's so interesting that you would say that, because I think you're right on one part of it, that the actual writing of it, I do feel more confident in it. And everything you said is exactly right. But it came from, there's 3 characters, and the character of Georgie, the Woolsey, kind of the Caroline thread of it, that was really hard because it came from letters that came from the archives at the Bellamy Faraday House, and there were 1,000 letters. And I had to read them all. I was obsessed with, I have to read every one. And, each one had several pages and, tiny writing. So there were so many good things and such an embarrassment of riches in those letters that was really, really hard because, as you know, you only have so much space, and you have to make sure the scenes in the book are the best available. So things like when I read that letter that they talk about in the little reel about going to Charleston, for example, when I read that the women had gone down there and that really happened, and they spoke to an enslaved woman through the fence or through the gate of the slave mart, that was easy. I mean, I said that's first, but then there were so many other things, and I do these giant timelines, and putting that outline together, that timeline was really, really tough because I just wanted to make sure I was getting all the best stuff. And also choosing Georgie was tough because there were 7 sisters and 1 son. Mrs. Wolsey brought them up by herself. And all 7 of them were so well educated, so beautifully brought up that it was tough choosing. So that was hard too. The other 2 characters, I knew I wanted enslaved girl. I knew I wanted a plantation mistress to show the horrors of slavery, and also just the day-to-day. What was it like to be enslaved? What was it like to be the head of a plantation as a woman? So I just wanted to show the realities of that. So, but once I got all of that figured out, I think you're right. I think it was easier than the other ones because I felt like I kind of knew what I was doing. Do you ever really feel like you completely know what you're doing as a writer? I don't know. Maybe, Hemingway at the end of his career felt that way, but I don't know. He was kind of insecure.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. We don't want to compare ourselves to Hemingway. Didn't end well. But
Yes.
I think, what you're saying about having all these letters, I know it also as historical fiction writer, I can get overwhelmed with the history. And like you said, the challenge is finding the moments that you can bring to life as a scene. And then even the characters who are entirely fictional, informing them with everything that so that they feel like they could have been real. But we go to fiction for a different purpose. You could read a history book, but you use fiction because you want that experience, the human experience, and you want to be taken on that journey. So that's why I mentioned the plotting, because it was really fun and kind of exciting. There's spies. I'm not going to give anything away. There are riots, there are spies, there's escapes, fugitives. I mean, things are going on. And so it made it really fun to read and wondering what was going to happen next. I really enjoyed that aspect.
Oh, that's good. I'm sure you do this too. I always try and write the book that I want to read. And I am such a tough customer when it comes to reading. Some people they can read anything and they finish the book. I don't know. I need that fun and excitement and the emotional connection to the characters. Because if I don't have that right away, I kind of get sour on a book, and it's terrible. It's a character flaw, but it's a reality, and there are a lot of people like that. So I'm glad that you felt that way about it.
I had a really good time reading it.
Which is funny when you think about, it's a Civil War book.
It's the Civil War, and there's a lot of really harsh stuff going on. But as a reading experience, I really enjoy. I'm looking at my notes. That's why I'm not facing the camera properly.
Awesome.
One thing that I was really interested in as you develop these characters, so you chose Georgie. I loved, she is a nurse and ends up nursing soldiers in the Civil War, like you said. And you developed this fictional character, Anne May or Anna May?
Anne May.
Anne May, to be the mistress of this plantation in the border state of Maryland. And then you also developed the character of Gemma. And if you could talk a little bit about that process, developing these fictional characters so they feel really, as a reader, they feel as real as the character who is like inspired by all these actual documents.
Well, I always start with a character board, and I just go online and find all these pictures of what that person looks like to me. And that's super helpful. And then I put mine up on my bulletin board, like I see you have your bulletin board back there. And I live with them for a little while and do kind of a whole, what they like to do, just kind of their personalities and things, but I also read a lot of the period, and that's super helpful. I did that with all my other two books. One of the books I read when I was developing Gemma's character was Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. I don't know if you've read that. Oh my God, it is such a powerful book. It's nonfiction, but it reads like a novel, and it's a really nice companion book to Sunflower Sisters. Harriet Jacobs was enslaved in North Carolina, and she was owned by a young woman in her teens whose brother-in-law was a physician and who hounded Harriet. He was very attracted to her. She was very beautiful. And he built a house in the woods with the sole intention of getting her to go out there and kind of be his concubine. And she was horrified by that and terrified, and asked her aunt to hide her in her house, which she did, in a coffin-sized room for 2 years. The book is amazing, and it talks about how she could look out a little crack up there from the attic and watch her children during the day, and they had been told that she had left them. So when I read that book, Gemma just kind of started to come alive, and then going to places like Sauterley Plantation, like you saw in the little film, the slave cabin there. I mean, the minute I walked in there, I just felt the whole group. You know, Gemma feels lucky because, and it's sad to even think that, you know, a person would consider themselves lucky just to have their family intact. But she was so grateful and nervous that that was going to change at any moment, because of course enslaved families so often were broken up and sold away, but her mom and dad are still there living with her, because the mistress of the plantation, Ann May's aunt, who left the plantation to her, and she's passed away, Aunt Tandy Rose, had kept that family intact for a reason, and she had meant to free them when she died, and Anne May had, when she inherited the plantation, had other plans. So you know, it all just kind of started coming together once I saw Sauterley, and also once I kind of got Anne May together. You know, sometimes when the character, I don't want to say the villain, but the person that brings all that conflict, once Anne May came into the picture, I felt like Gemma started kind of developing too, because I gave Gemma the ability to read and write. Her Aunt Tandy Rose had done it for her own reasons. She wanted Gemma, who was a house slave, to read to her, you know, racy novels and the Bible, and to do her kitchen list. So it was completely for her own reasons why she wanted Gemma to read and write, but Gemma was really smart. And so she knew how to read and write, but Anne May does not know how to write. So that's where the conflict comes in. So once that kind of developed, usually I have all that kind of set in my books, but this time it kind of just came out of, you know, their relationship a little bit more. I'm not a pantser, you know, there's pantsers and plotters. And that was kind of a nice thing. And also giving her, she wants a best friend. And that was kind of like Kasha from Lilac Girls. Gemma in this book just wants a best friend. And she had one, but something bad happened to the friend. You know, when you were a slave, you had no control over your environment. And I hope that comes true, because for me, that was one of the interesting things that I found in my research, is just the horror of just not knowing and no control over your environment. And that's obvious, I guess. But for me, once I dug into it and created that character, that was one of the, I think the hardest thing, because I kind of like to become my characters. And for me to not have that kind of control as Gemma was really, really tough. And of course, her wanting to have a best friend, I thought really made some other characters like Celeste in the book come alive. And once that started happening, that Gemma's chapters, I don't want to say they wrote themselves because that's kind of obnoxious. I hate it when writers say that, but in a way, they kind of did, which is always nice. You know, if you can get a little help, don't you think, going forward in the writing journey, it's always nice.
No, and I enjoyed the balance of them, and even with Anne May, the villain, for me, her main character, I don't know, her main motivation is just the selfishness. And to see how that spilled out in all these different areas, you know, even into some of the things that had to do with the plot and with spying and so forth, but just her whole worldview, so selfish. But then you have to read to the end and see how it all turns out. So as a reader, you rewarded.
On another event, somebody said, I was so upset. Well, I can't really tell you what happens because that's a spoiler. But they felt that I should have been tougher on Anne May. And I thought, you know, it's tough because even with Herta Oberhauser back with Lilac Girls, you know, the Nazi doctor that did horrible things to young girls in that concentration camp. I think you have to, if you want to have a realistic character, you have to put the good with the bad. I mean, they cannot be 100% bad. And I got a lot of letters about her, some people saying that she was the favorite character in the book, but others saying, you know, she should have been executed. And the reality is she was a real person, and that's not what happened. And I think we have to remember it's more interesting when they're not just fully bad characters, because no one is, I mean, it's a rare person that is born horrible and is just that way for their whole life, like a sociopath. And that's the way I started with Herta. I had written her that way originally, and then my agent said, you have to make her more real. So after that, I made all my characters very kind of mixed. Even Georgie is not perfect. And it was hard because I fell in love with these women, reading their letters and being with Caroline's family for so long. But you have to, I think, as a writer, say, you know, they're not going to be perfect. And Gemma's not perfect either. Although, you know, it's hard not making her perfect because I loved her so much. But you know, she's got her problems too. I mean, I without giving spoilers, it's hard. But you know, some of the things that she does with Celeste are not great. She should have been smarter. And, you know, I get that from my own life, though, because I make a lot of mistakes and I should have done the right thing. And I think that's it, when you're vulnerable and show the characters as vulnerable. I think that's what makes you love them partly, is that they do the same kind of stupid things that we all do. Me anyway. So I hope that answered your question. I went off on kind of a tangent.
No, it's, you know, I mean, that's really what this is for, is to give everybody who's here a chance to hear from you about that process in writing and developing the characters, and hopefully they'll want to meet these people and learn a little bit more. One thing I was curious about, especially we saw in the trailer, the travel that you do. I love to do that as much as I can as well. Just to make sure I've put myself in a place and have gotten a sense of it. So the last trip I took before everything started to shut down, we were in Amsterdam in October 19, so just before the spring.
Oh, Amsterdam is so wonderful.
Yeah, and doing the research for the book I'm working on now. But with Sunflower Sisters, everything came home. It's not about Russia or Germany or Paris, you know, it's all the United States, and actually like basically you're between Maryland and New York mostly, right? Maryland, New York, that little stretch of
that's it. Oh, Washington. Yeah, well, that's between. Yeah.
What was that like for you to take these techniques that you learned in traveling to these far places and trying to situate scenes in foreign places and to bring that all home?
You know, I'm glad that I could at least go to Gettysburg and to Sauderley during COVID. You know, I obviously couldn't travel. So if this had been a book about something in Europe, that I would have been out of luck. So in a way, that was good. It was so much more emotional. And I didn't expect that, frankly. I didn't think that it was going to be. You know, I've written about Nazis and the Bolsheviks, and, you know, those are really emotional subjects. But when it came, for some reason, writing about the Civil War, I mean, I could cry right now talking about it. It's such an emotional thing. And it was personal this time. And I didn't realize it. It was also, this is the last book about this family, and I've really gotten attached, and I feel like that was all part of it too, because when I was writing the end, like the few scenes at the end, my husband came in a few times to my office, and I was just a mess. And I don't usually, you know, cry that way when I'm writing, but it was just really, really an emotional process. And I think a big part of that is that it's the end, but it was an American story. And I feel like it was so connected to today, because, you know, when you look at the draft riots, for example, in the book, it was a huge insurrection. It was the largest, it was 4 days, it remains the largest insurrection in our country. And when I saw what happened to the Capitol in January, I just thought, oh my God, this is it again. We have not learned a thing from the Civil War. There were so many things like that. And so it was just the gulf between us, I think. You know, then it was North and South, but today, you know, it's conservatives and liberals. It's kind of the same thing. And I feel like, you know, it hasn't gotten any better. So that was all kind of a part of the sadness of it too. But it's us. It's not Russia this time. It's not Nazi Germany. It's us. And but that also made it really, really rewarding as well, you know, to write about Washington and our country. And, you know, they met Lincoln, and, you know, that was fun. I don't usually do a lot of kind of cameos in my books, because I think, you know, they can get corny fast. But I thought the fact that, you know, I read a letter where they talk about what it was like to shake Lincoln's hand. And I thought, you know, why not just try and show that? Yeah, his big hand. They talked about him. And, you know, going to the White House and having all the crazy stuff they talk about, people were snipping off pieces of the rug in like the Blue Room or wherever they were, and the pieces of the draperies as souvenirs. And he even talks to them about it. And it's like, you know, he references that. And it's just such a weird thing. And you can't make that stuff up.
No.
So I decided to put Lincoln in there. And of course, Frederick Olmsted is in it, who designed and created Central Park. And he was the head of the Sanitary Commission and became huge fans of Georgie and her sister Eliza, who, you know, spoiler, they do become nurses on the, you know, for the Sanitary Commission. It is in the jacket cover of the book, so I figure it's not that much of a spoiler. But yeah, so there were a lot of real people in the book that, you know, I love putting those in, you know, in small doses.
There's a moment when they meet Frederick Law Olmsted, and I don't remember if it was Georgie or one of her sisters who took him to task for displacing Seneca Village, this independent African-American property owning small town little village in New York City that was mostly in Central Park. And I don't know, I was like, that was something that I remember learning about. And that little moment, I particularly appreciated, like jumped off the page at me.
Oh, that's so nice. You're
Just like
such a close reader.
graphic, like, oh, Central Park is the best place in the universe. Like, yeah, it's great, but
But they basically came through and just wiped out all the African American, and there were churches and towns that were set up there. That I thought was another kind of interesting for me. I had never heard about that before, but that was the woman that brings that up is Carrie. That's Caroline's grandmother.
Oh, okay.
If you've read Lost Roses, all these, Georgie, my main point of view character in this book, is Caroline Faraday's great aunt. So there's a timeline on my website, but Carrie, the youngest daughter, she is Caroline's grandmother. And she was a brilliant woman, unbelievable. And she, of course, married Edward Mitchell, and that's how their house out on Long Island became the Mitchell Cottage in Lost Roses.
Well, I'm going to check in with Rachel and David and see if you're getting a lot of questions from participants. I don't want to monopolize Martha the whole time. I have plenty more to ask, but if we want to bring in some other voices, I think that would be great.
We have one question in the chat, unless someone has direct messaged something to David, but I can share that, and then maybe we can go back to you, and then audience, if you have questions, you can type them into the chat and we can sort of go back and forth a bit. But the question here is, Martha, can you talk about the person you met who inspired Gemma's character?
Are you talking about Harriet Jacobs, the book that I wrote?
I'm not sure. It was from, maybe just talk a little bit more generally about the inspiration behind Gemma's
think
character.
You mentioned, Martha, on the tour of the plantation, meeting a woman who was talking to you about her ancestors.
Oh, okay. I think I know what you're talking about. When I did an event at the Bellamy Faraday House, and Kathy, yes. Okay, it's all becoming clear. So Brian and Tracy's iPad, they must have read the book and know about Kathy from the author's note. Is that possible? But anyway, yes, I was at the Bellamy Faraday House and Kathy was there. And I just got talking to her about just things in general. And she said, "Are you writing another book?" And I said, "Yes, I'm writing a Civil War book." And she said, "Well, my great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents were enslaved at a place called Sauterley Plantation." And so and she said, "I think, you might want to check it out." It was a tobacco plantation. And I had wanted to write about a tobacco plantation. So it felt like, it was such a wonderful kind of synchronicity that she would mention Sauterley, because at that point, I didn't know, I had visited a lot of former plantations, now museums, because I lived down in Atlanta, but I didn't know that many in Maryland. And I really wanted to focus on Maryland because it was a border state. And they kept slavery until the very end of the war, because Lincoln was afraid if he said, "No, you can't have slavery anymore," they would go join the Confederates. So, and when you think about where Maryland is placed in terms of Washington, that would have been really dangerous. So I went down to Sauterley, and it was just the perfect place. I think that Kathy, was an angel to just come along at that one moment. It's funny how that happens sometimes when you're writing a book. But once I walked around there, and oftentimes on those tours, they don't even include the story of slavery, but they do at Sauterley. And if you ever have a chance to go down there, it's so worth the trip. They have renovated their cabin where the enslaved people would sleep, and it's just so beautifully done, and it's a really important part of their tour. Also, they have a really they've done a great job with the main house and the tobacco barn, the smokehouse, all the outbuildings are incredible, and it's right on the banks of the Patuxent River. And the generous Jenny, one of the first slave ships, pulled up to, so it's a very, incredibly historic spot, because the generous Jenny used to pull up to the banks there and sell slaves from the deck of the ship. there. So, I mean, it's got an incredible history and a wonderful gift shop with every book you can imagine on the topic. So it's really, really great.
I have to say, when I do my research, the gift shops of these places, because they're, they have such a very specific focus in what they stock. And there have been a number of times when that's where I've come across a book that proved to be just really crucial that I might not have stumbled across in general. So yes, most places have little tiny bookshops. Northshire is a great bookshop, but finding those books is, I think about the Tenement Museum in New York City. My first book was practically set there for a couple of chapters. And their selection of books in their gift shop is really so specific and so beautifully curated. So
yes, I remember that. Yes, that's a wonderful tour.
That I think they're starting to open up. A lot of places were able to pivot to virtual tours so that you can still participate. And in some ways, I hope that a lot of places will continue to offer that as an option, because not everybody can go every place, even in the best of times.
Yeah, I know the Bellamy Faraday House is opening May 1st for in-person tours. So it's exciting. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, if I'm remembering right, like I said, it was finding these letters and learning about the Woolseys that inspired you to learn how to write a novel so that you could write Lilac Girls?
Yes, I'm embarrassed to say that is true.
No, that's fine. But now you are a novelist. I mean, this has happened.
Knocking on wood.
So, it's the inevitable sort of what's next. You said that you're kind of done with these women who've been so inspiring and who gave you this new career, this new great way to reach people and talk to people and communicate with them. Where do you turn next?
I do think that is true, that I'm so grateful to these women. I feel like when I walked into Caroline's house, she just kind of, tapped me on the shoulder and said, this is what you're going to be doing. And I didn't realize that was happening, but I feel like she was such a strong woman, even though she's gone, from her human form. I feel like she still is, is helping. I went to a psychic once who told me there's a very tall, very strong woman coming forward clapping. And I was like, oh my God, Caroline, hello. But so that has really been incredible. But going forward, I feel like I have to just do what I think is interesting, because that's kind of what happened with Lilac Girls. I mean, I didn't think anybody would read it, but I kind of wrote it like no one was watching. So I keep trying to do that and not have that filter on, that like author filter. But so next, I am writing a Cold War novel that kind of picks up where Lilac Girls left off. And I don't know if you've read Operation Paperclip, the book. It's really fascinating. I see Rachel saying yes. Operation Paperclip was a covert operation in the United States. The US Army was bringing former Nazis. I don't know if I like that phrase, but Nazi doctors and scientists from that were, Hitler's acolytes. They brought them to the United States to work on some of our programs, like the atomic bomb program and the space program. And so my characters are an American girl who survives Ravensbrück and half Jewish, and her friend who's French. And it picks up in the 50s after they've been liberated, but a bad doctor has done bad things to both of them, two kind of separate things. And they hunt him down and all across the world. And they go from Vienna to Rome to Paris to South America and try and hunt that doctor down. So that's
Oh
fun.
my gosh. Where do they go in South America? Can I ask?
They go to French Guiana.
French Guiana. I've been to French Guiana.
You have?
I have, because the book that I thought was going to be my last book, but then I didn't know quite how to write it, so I put it back away. But I think now it's going to be my next book, is about the Jewish history in Suriname, which is next to French
Right next door.
And my mom came with me. We spent 2 weeks in Suriname a couple of years ago. And on one little boat tour, part of it was, we're going to cross the river and you can hang out in French Guiana for a little while. For us, we didn't change our money properly, so we couldn't do anything. So we just kind of sat in French Guiana and looked around. But so yes, that's amazing. That's amazing.
So I haven't been there because of COVID, but you have. So when you read it, it will all come alive.
Well, like I said, we only spent a couple hours in French Guiana, but Suriname was really, really interesting for me. Suriname is the place that the Dutch traded Manhattan for. So when
I think they got a bad deal.
I know, it seems like it seemed to them like a good deal at the time. When New Amsterdam became New York, the Dutch and the British were like, all right, well, the Dutch said, we'll take Suriname then. And so it's just very interconnected to a lot of things. So I'm planning, like you said, with the Easter eggs, I'm planting a character in the book I'm writing now who will take us hopefully to a sequel.
Ooh,
We'll see.
That's really smart. I love that.
Yeah, the first 2 books, they kind of have some crossover, but they're not so directly. Envisioning a sequel is really different than like what you've been doing, what I've done before, where there's threads that connect them. But like I was saying, your books, absolutely, each one stands completely on its own. I think it would be fun to read them in sequence, but I don't think anybody should feel like they have to. And
then this next book is called, what is it called? The Golden Doves. And so no more flowers, but it's not really that connected to Lilac Girls, but it does kind of have some of the same characters, like Herta Oberhauser's in it, the bad doctor from Lilac Girls. But other than that, it's mostly, there's a few flashbacks in it, but it's mostly set in the 50s. And so, which is so fun. Don't you love, the 50s is so much fun to write about. And then after that is a thriller. I think my agent's referring to it as a suspense novel about, it's a contemporary suspense novel, which is called The Girl on Windy Hill.
Cool. Well, Rachel says she has some questions from other participants. So I'll turn this over to Rachel and just say, thanks for hanging out with me, Martha. I have such a great time talking with you.
Thank you. And I cannot wait to read your next book. You have to send it to me.
I will hold you to that. Thank you so much. Good. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So first of all, a quick one from Diane. She asks, can you tell us the title of the new book, The Cold War?
Oh, it is called The Golden Doves. That's just the working title, but hopefully they'll want to keep it. That's not my decision, so.
And then Patricia has asked if you could both tell us a little bit more about Sotterley Plantation, and then also if you know when the lilacs are in bloom in Bethlehem.
That I do know. Sotterley Plantation is an unbelievable place. It's in not far from Washington, D.C., and it's in a little town called Hollywood, Maryland, which is so perfect. And it was named Hollywood because they had 2 holly bushes. You can't make it up. It's hilarious. So it is a beautiful, beautiful main house. And people have been enslaved on that plantation since the very early days of Sotterley, and it's always been a tobacco plantation. And the main house is absolutely beautifully decorated, And like they have a gorgeous Chippendale staircase going up and beautiful furnishings and things. And the tour is really fascinating because they talk about the enslaved people and where they, how they related to the house. For example, before they had built slave cabins, they said that the slaves had to sleep on the stairs. And of course, the house slaves slept in with the mistress and the master of the plantation, oftentimes at the foot of their bed, which, you know, I find so, it's just so sad. But the other slaves had no cabin at that point, and they slept on the stairs. And also on that tour, you find out that the pantry at Sotterley was where the enslaved people came to get their wages, which they were paid in food. So it, you know, they weren't paid money, but every week on a Friday, they would come in and get a certain amount of, you know, bacon and a little bit of, you know, rice, whatever, flour. And it's just so moving and fascinating to stand in that same pantry and realize that that is what used to happen there. And then of course you go down the hill to the slave cabin, and it's just hard to imagine. I mean, the contrast is so striking that you go from this incredible house that, you know, 2 or 3 people lived in, and to, you know, a cabin where 12 or 14 people were squeezed in, and they slept on corn husk pallets. And, you know, it gets cold in Maryland, and all they had was a fire. And so, yeah, it was really interesting going there, and the outbuildings are incredible. It's well worth the trip. I think, you know, I've been to a lot of those kind of museums, and Sutter is definitely my favorite. And the question about when the lilacs are coming out. Well, it depends on the what kind of a winter we've had. And it was a cold winter, but not as bad as some. So I have a feeling right around Mother's Day, you're going to start to get some lilacs, and they last up until the beginning of June. Last year, we had a really cold winter, so the lilacs were late. Everybody was fretting over, and the year before that too, they were all fretting because a lot of people come up to see the lilacs at the house, and people like to, you know, before COVID, people were coming, they were averaging 80 people a day at the house, which is crazy for that. You know, it's a little town, Bethlehem, and they're averaging a lot of people, and they like to make sure that when they come, that the lilacs are out. So, you know, 2 years ago, it really flummoxed everybody because the lilacs didn't come out until June. But I think this year, probably, definitely before June.
So we are just about out of time, but I do have one last question from that was messaged to me from someone who was at the tea last year. And it's a question partially for Martha and then partially for both of you, which is, what happened to the rest of your book tour, Martha, after you saw us last March? And then both of you, how has this writing year been for you, other than obviously not being able to?
Oh, that's going to be a good one for Kim too. For me, the writing tour was, I mean, right after RT, which was so fun. I think I had 2 more events, but I was in Alabama on the tarmac flying to Houston, and my agent called and said, you have to come home. And it was so sad because I had only made it through half the tour, and the other half was all the warm places that, you know, let's face it, it's cold. We go through a cold winter, and it was California, and I think Florida and some of the warm places, but I had a lot of friends in Florida too, because they're snowbirds and they were all waiting. So I had to go home. So that was really kind of heartbreaking because the hardcover for Lost Roses had been such a success. And I think they were really excited about the paperback as well for book clubs and everything. But once all the bookstores shut down, it was just, Oh, it was just so sad, and so sad for the bookstores. That whole thing was really kind of debilitating. But writing wise, it was okay because I live on a hay farm and it's kind of isolated anyway. And so writing for me, it was okay. Um, it was more my two of my adult children moved home with us though, which was not always conducive to writing. Right around 6 o'clock, they're online, working, and when their day is over, they would come in and say, Mom, we're done with work, let's go, have a glass of wine. And I'd be like, I work until 10 o'clock at night, guys, I can't, but so it was tempting sometimes to go do stuff with them. But yeah, I mean, writing wise for me, it was kind of business as usual, but I'm interested to hear what Kim has to say about that answer.
I'm working on my third book. I'm under contract. I have a deadline that I might miss by a couple of weeks. And I had everything really well laid out. And I found that March, so I taught in the fall semester. I wasn't teaching in the spring, but I got freaked out. I was just emotionally I was really distracted. And March and April, like I just really could hardly write at all. And so I did research notes. I did an online program to learn how to touch type because I've never properly typed yet in my life. And I'm still halfway. But so I did that. I thought, well, at least that's like writing. And then my fall semester went entirely online. So I spent most of the summer figuring out how to teach everything online. And then it was, even though I didn't have to go anywhere, it was pretty intense. So it knocked my timeline off sort of psychologically and then with other things. But once I settled back into it, it's going really well. And so I'm trying to write fast, but I don't write at night. That's so amazing. I have to write first thing in the morning. I don't even get dressed. I just come in here and start, like I sneak up on it before I get.
That's the best stuff.
Yeah. And by 2 or 3 in the afternoon, I'm like spent.
Yeah, me too. Sometimes, unless I have a little coffee, and then all of a sudden I'm like, boo, it happens.
Good for you. I don't usually come back for a second round. I'll have to take a note.
So now are you typing, like real typing?
Yes, I'm real typing mostly. And
I'm so jealous.
I can kind of do it. I still type wrong a little faster than I type right, but I know if I make myself type correctly, eventually that will speed up. So
absolutely. And you really pivoted. You used that time in a really good way, I think.
I also took an online Dutch class because a lot of my research is in Holland. I have Dutch ancestry, and it was maybe a little bit of a procrastination thing, but it's actually helped me a bit with some of the research I'm doing, even though it was just pretty basic. So
see, I think you did exactly the right thing. Instead of just getting paralyzed, you did book stuff.
I had to do something, but yeah, my writing got kind of stalled. Well, Rachel, Tuffy, let's make sure we turn it back to you in time.
I did want to mention, Rachel, that I saw one of the comments that I met someone at your tea that for some reason we were talking about having, a muff that you put your hands in. Mm-hmm. And I promised them that I would put a muff in the book. And I did. And one of them just said they were so happy that they found which page it's on page 161.
That is fantastic.
I love that.
Is a little secret thing that only a select group of people know is special. So
that was such a fun event. And someday maybe we'll have another one. That's on my bucket list.
Yes, hopefully we will have tea in Saratoga again for the Cold War book and all be together again that day.
That would be so awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel and Kim.
Thank you so much for coming together again to do this. This was such a treat. Audience, thank you so much for being here. You can visit us at northshire.com to order both of these authors' books. and also to check out more great events. For historical fiction fans, we have Caitlin Greenidge tomorrow for her amazing book, Liberty, which is going to be a lot
I'll
of
be
fun.
there for that. I'm so excited for that book.
I know,
I'm so excited.
That's another really great one. It's a wonderful week. So we'll see you all again soon and have a great night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye, Martha. Bye, David.
Bye,
Rachel.
Kim.
Bye, everybody.